Welcome to the Retiring Well podcast. My name is Charlie Jordan. I'm your host, and I am so glad you joined me today. Our mission here at Retiring Well is simple. We want to help you do just that, to retire well. We're going to look at more than just the money and examine multiple aspects of life and retirement and how your wealth can be used to improve your life and the life of others. This is Retiring Well. Hey everyone, Charlie here. I am really excited about sharing this episode with you for a couple of reasons. The first is this is the first of a quarterly series we're going to start doing called Women Retiring Well, where we take a focused approach and look at women and their unique circumstances and strategies, etc., when dealing with this phase of life we call retirement. And then second, I'm really excited for you to hear from our guest today, and that is Stacy Hanley. Stacy is an estate attorney here in Atlanta, Georgia. She is a principal in the firm Lefkoff, Duncan, Grimes, McSwain, Hass, and Hanley. Stacy and I are going to take a look at a number of different topics when it comes to how women can be prepared for retirement, help them to retire well. Stacy takes us through her dream, design, and build process for helping women doing just that. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, a lot of different topics. You're going to hear a lot of passion. And anytime you talk about a specific group of people, you run the risk of dealing with stereotypes. So we'll ask for some grace in that today. We know not every situation is common, but we do think that there are opportunities for us to speak generally about the circumstances and strategies that women deal with when we're talking about this life in retirement. So really looking forward to you enjoying this conversation with Stacy Hanley. Well, Stacy, I want to thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you, Charlie, so much for having me.
So we're talking about women retiring well, and this is the Retiring Well podcast. And in our framework, we are really trying to help people look at life in retirement, how their money can be used to improve their lives. And women is obviously, that's a huge group of people we're talking about. So we're probably going to be very stereotypical in our conversations today, and that's okay. But our hope here is that women who are listening to this are going to say, hey, you know what, there's some steps I can take to retire well. And I think one of the things that we should probably look at is what kind of women are facing in this phase of life. So you think about retirement. We've talked a little about how that's kind of a wonky term anyway, because it really doesn't define what most people think about when they're actually in this stage of life. Why don't we talk about that first? Like, what do you think about redefining the word retirement?
Right. You and I talked about that. For a lot of women, this is the first time in their lives where they can really focus on themselves and what they want. They no longer have the burdens of motherhood, raising families. Maybe their initial career is now sunsetting, so they can finally really think about what they want. I saw this Serena Williams quote on her retirement. She was like, I don't like that word retirement. She was like, I see this as evolution. Yeah. Like, I am constantly changing. So for women, I think it can be, we talked about, a realignment, refocus, rejuvenation, rebirth. I mean, a lot of, things that can happen that you can finally look at, okay, what do I want out of the rest of my life? And this can be a time to really look at that and, and just sort of focus on those things.
Yeah, not to be, again, too stereotypical, but when I think about women that are sort of in this phase, I see three sort of distinct groups. I think about women who have their own career and they're thinking about their own retirement. I think about women who don't have a career, they're working at home. And then, sadly enough, a lot of women are thinking about what happens when my husband passes, because the odds are he's going to pass first. And so there's these three sort of distinct groups that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about women retiring well. Let's talk about maybe what you see as the issues that they're facing. And maybe we can just kind of use that framework, those three different groups, when you think about the issues that women face as they are maybe even past 50, honestly, and they're starting to think about what the next phase of life looks like. What are you seeing with women in that age?
Right. Well, first, let's talk about the career woman that's sort of been going, and now going to stop. I think a lot of it for that woman, she's had a lot of connection at work, right? A lot of her ego and things like that have been sort of work-based. She may have not been able to take care of herself physically because she's been working so hard or doing whatever. So that for that woman, I would want her to focus on her physical well-being, like health and wellness, and I want her to find another way to make connections. Because she's been so focused on work, she may not have some of the social connections that other women who have not been working have. Right. So whether that's, I'm joining certain clubs or I'm finding a ways to connect with other people. So I think, whether it's finding a charity, a volunteer, something where she's using that work skill set, but maybe not on this sort of day-to-day grind. But now she can really start taking care of her physical and emotional well-being.
Yeah, and that really spans across men and women. We talk about that a lot. It's one of the elements of retirement we talk about is health and social. We've talked a lot about here about social isolation just really being a killer for many people. And you're right, when people are retiring or they're working and they're just really focused on their work and they got to have their head down, they let some of these other areas kind of go oftentimes.
Absolutely.
But talk about maybe the distinct pressures that a career woman might feel, maybe more than a man does as they're kind of into this stage of life.
Right. Well, obviously, and I don't know if this career woman's married or not, but obviously, she's going to have to start living off the retirement. And there's been numerous statistics that show that women are definitely more risk averse than men. And so there could be a liquidity problem later in life. And now these retirement funds are going to have to, last a lot longer. She's also going to have to think about her long-term care and how she's going to fund that. So if she's been, putting money hopefully into her retirement plan for while she's had this career, hopefully that money's there. But she also needs to sort of get, learn about investments and learn about how, what's going to happen. She may have just been, I see a lot of women just sort of put money in the 401k, but never really think there's any need for any sort of financial advice outside of that. Like I've got, the company's, manager just pumping in whatever fund, but never thinking I've got all these other assets or tools I may need to retire well. So whether I need to look at life insurance or disability insurance, or I need to look at these other investments I have and how they should be invested to generate the income I'm going to need to live. And that woman also needs to think about what I'm going to be doing. What are my dreams and how am I going to fund them? Right. So if it's I want to, travel, 180 days out of the year, I'm going to figure out a way to pay for it. Or I just want to, pay off my mortgage and just sit here debt free and just so someone needs to sort of run this analysis. So it's not enough just that I put money in my company's retirement plan and now I'm going to go march on my merry way.
Right. So a lot of educating yourself, going through the process. Shameless plug, working with an advisor. We obviously think that adds value to be able to understand these things that you're talking about. Let's talk about the married woman who hasn't been working. And so this is is a little bit of a delicate topic because when you talk about retirement, oftentimes it's her spouse's retirement. Right. That's kind of what we're talking about. But clearly that's a joint effort. And clearly that is a journey they're on together. How do you advise women? And I would say, obviously, the strength of the marriage comes into play here, clearly. But how do you advise women who are thinking about life in, quote, retirement, but it's their husband who has been the breadwinner during this time. They've been the earned income, and how should they be viewing this phase of life?
Right. There was that old joke where the woman would say to the man, you can retire as long as you leave at 9 and don't come home till 5. So, and they'll be asking me what's for lunch. Yeah. All these things of just, so it's like it's a resetting of the equilibrium, right? Husband may have left all day or traveled and she, and the wife has sort of had her daily things that she liked to do and just sort of marched on. So it's kind of sort of this reset of the equilibrium. So maybe before, now they kind of find a new balance of they both contribute to the meals. Husband finds a new toward, barbecuing. So now they're meals together, or they're finding restaurants together. They're finding new common ground and interests. So whether that's, playing some sort of sport. I have one couple who husband had big financial services job, and they, in their retirement, both became substitute teachers. So they both went on, and they're just substitute teachers in Cobb County school system, work a few days a month, and that's something they both can talk about and connect with. Right. They're not starting at the same school, but they've kind of sort of reset their lives, and now, be able to find, similar passions. But I think it's important for that woman, again, to not become, okay, now I'm making my husband lunch every day, or I'm just catering to what I mean, you still need to have your own things.
Right.
So maybe that he is home now and can sort of take on more of that home responsibility and please assign it to him. Maybe she can now forge her own interest and her own things that she wants to do.
What sort of pitfalls have you seen for women in this phase, in this situation?
Well, I think it is that now we've had, again, husband wants to come home and now he was head of whatever, now wants to be head of the household and basically sort of, directing himself into that situation where now maybe the wife has been the one sort of controlled all that. So I think a lot of times, again, it's sort of resetting like who's doing what and what the roles are. And that's sort of, in relationships are supposed to evolve over time. We're not supposed to stay stagnant.
Right.
So it's kind of, having to sort of that reset. But I think if you wake up every day and you feel purposeful and useful in your own right, I think that goes a lot to balancing out the relationship.
Yeah, yeah. And then finally, I know most women have this in the back of their mind is what happens if? So what happens, most of the time it's going to be my husband passes, but it may be what if we're just no longer together? How should a woman, let's just say she's 62 years old, her husband's retiring, and she's thinking, I know the stats. I know that it's very likely I'm going to be the one that is managing the household completely at some point. What should they be thinking about during that time frame? Yeah,
that's a great point. I mean, the stats are pretty, 80% of men die married, 80% of women die single. I think widows outlive their husbands by an average of 14 years. And so, for a woman, you will be financially responsible for yourself. The odds are high that that's going to happen. So it's much better to be prepared. And what that looks like is educating yourself. So knowing, make sure you've met all the advisors, make sure you know the CPA, the financial advisor, who to call, the lawyer, make sure you know where all the assets are. Now that everything's online, know where all the passwords are, online access, look at statements. I mean, go ahead and take inventory now, not later. Because I think people make a lot of assumptions. They're like, oh, I don't know if our house is, in joint name or, in his name or my name. I mean, no one's really taking an inventory and they just sort of make assumptions. And a lot of times I see women who think, well, and you ask them, when was the last time you updated your financial plan or your estate plan? And they'll say, well, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure everything goes to me. You're like, well, does it go to you? How do we look at that? Is it going in trust for you with a trustee that was named that y'all were friends with 15 years ago and now have no relationship with? Or a bank was named that you no longer have a banking relationship with? Let's constantly look at this stuff. So the first thing is to get educated and figure out sort of what's what and take inventory now while your husband and you are both competent. You're both able to make decisions for yourself. Because what you don't want to happen is a situation where you're dealing with a spouse with Alzheimer's or you're dealing with something that's emotionally charged and you're just trying to find, figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're an estate planner, you're an attorney. There's clearly a lot of passion in this area for you. And I'm assuming it's not just because you're a woman. I assume there's a personal story and we all have a personal story on why we're passionate about what we do. So tell me a little bit about your story and why this topic really is something that hits home to you.
Yeah. Well, so my dad died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 67. And a few days after my dad's death, I heard my mom on the phone with a guy named Tom Flanoy, who is a life insurance agent at New York Life and is also one of my dad's very best friends. And I hear her on the phone basically asking Tom, do I have any money? And she obviously didn't know. And in my mom's defense, she kind of chose to bury her head in the sand because my dad was a real estate developer builder.
Sure.
She got tired of the ups and downs of that market and but with her head in the sand, she was woefully unprepared for life after my dad's death.
How old was she at the time?
She was 66.
Okay.
So it was definitely it was a hard time period. And years ago when I was in the throes of going to a lot of baby showers, I would kind of appropriate this quote from Winnie the Pooh. And I'd say, when it comes to motherhood, you're braver than you believe, you're smarter than you think, and you're stronger than you seem. So I basically, years later, I'm having to say the same thing to my 66-year-old mother. And I remember a few months after my dad's death, she's sobbing on the couch and she looks up at me and is like, I used to think I'm a strong person and I don't think that anymore. And I was like, Mom, you will feel strong again. You will. And so it took about 18 months before I started hearing joy back in her voice. And it was a long 18 months. But part of the reason was she started restarting her life again. She started like planning family trips and started having things to look forward to. And, it takes bravery to restart your life after, it takes bravery to take the wedding ring off.
Right.
And basically, okay, I'm not married anymore. It takes, these are all these little small steps, it takes bravery. She also connected with a financial planner. Mm-hmm. She had never met the financial planner that my dad had before he died, had never met him. And we actually had a meeting with him after and didn't know my mom at all. I think thought she was a delicate flower and didn't realize that she'd actually been a loan officer in her previous life at a bank. And so she was well equipped to write a check and balance a checkbook.
Right.
And so she just didn't know her. And but when she connected with a financial advisor and got a clear path, she basically became smarter with her money. So then she was smarter than she thought. And then lastly, she realized there were a lot of widows like around her that probably felt as lonely as she did. So she formed a widows club. So to have sort of this social connection, somewhere to be on a Saturday night, whether it's dinner with girls and kind of talk about things. Yeah. And with that sort of, purpose gave her strength. Mm-hmm. So I think we always need to remind women, no matter what stage they are, that they are braver than they believe, they're smarter than they think, and stronger than they seem.
That's a great quote.
And they constantly have to be reminded of it because we all go through so many things. And I hear a lot of women, and you and I have talked about this before. I was at a breakfast with some of my friends whose moms, one was a product of a great divorce. Two of the women were widows, and they were not thriving. Mm. And you hear a lot of, I'm never going to do X. I'm never going to find love again. I'm never going to do this. And it's like, why are we limiting our possibilities here?
Yeah.
It's like, and maybe you lost the love of your life, but like you could find a new loving relationship. Like love multiplies, it doesn't divide. Or don't live the rest of your life with fear. Live it with hope. And so these women were not thriving. The other two, my mom had gotten to a much better place, but it's like, how do we jumpstart them again? And like, there's life after this, whatever is.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you talked about because I think it's incredibly important. It is important in my business. It's important in yours. And that is knowing your advisors. I mean, I've tried to make it as much as mandatory as possible that both husband and wife are going to be at every meeting. That doesn't always happen for every meeting. And we all have our lanes. We talked about that before. And I think that's pretty common. Husband has his lane and the wife has her lane. And, apart from each other, you're both in trouble with the thing you don't do. But stereotypically and oftentimes the husband kind of is the money person. Here we call it the CFO spouse.
Right. And
our goal is to get the women engaged in the process. So that's on a couple people. It's on the advisor to do that, to make it engaging. There's certain things people just don't want to hear. And I do think that most women, I think all the women I work with, incredibly smart, talented people who have maybe done things I don't even know about, but maybe this isn't their forte. It's just not what they feel the most comfortable with. So a lot of times you see them kind of shrink back from it. And I think from my perspective, an advisor's role is to help engage women to make sure they feel a part of it. And if you're talking about their life and not just sitting there talking about Sharpe ratios and investment quotients, if you're talking about life topics and how your money can be used to improve your life, most people are going to be very well attuned to that and be interested in that. But I think it's also on both spouses. It's on the husband to make it very clear, I want you a part of this. And if it has to be this way, you're invited to this. Like whatever it takes to make them feel you are an equal part of this conversation. And then it's on the woman to act on that. And I do know that we've kind of heard the proverbial, you know what, honey, you go to the meeting and take care of that, and I'll just do my thing. It's not what I'm interested in. But I think to avoid a lot of the problems you're talking about, women need to step in that gap. They need to go through that door when it's open for them. So I think it's on everybody to try to engage, because I think you're right. If you don't know the people who are giving you counsel, that's a huge problem. And it's one of the reasons that I got so passionate about, helping women, especially helping widows, is because I looked at the stats too. I saw that 70-80% of every couple client I have is going to be in a female client.
Correct.
And then I saw that the average age of a widow in this country is 57.
Right.
I said, holy smokes, this is not what you think of in your mind as, the 80-year-old widow, for example. And I realized that also the other issue is so many women don't know their advisors deeply. And so guess what happens? They find someone else.
Correct.
So I started realizing for my own self-preservation, I need to make sure that we're engaging them, but it's also the right thing to do because you see now a different engagement with the family when you're able to pull everybody in. And I just think it's so critically important because what we've talked about so far is educating yourself, but also being connected and engaged with the advisory team. So I just think that's something that's really, really important.
It is. And I can't tell you, like if we had, widow comes in and whatever, and she's already, I call Charlie, I call Stacy, and you and I go to work, and she can sit there and focus on what she needs to do emotionally and not worry about all these things. Where is this? What is this? What did we do? You and I go to work, maybe with the CPA, like we have the team in place. And so she can focus on emotional healing, not worrying about, do I have money? What's it going to be? What did the will say? Where is the will? I mean, all these things are already, the team is already set, and you and I go to work and do all the, the business side of the death. It's just hard to deal with. As opposed to being like, oh my gosh, I don't know who had title to that or where that account was or who the beneficiary was. She calls Charlie and calls Stacy, and it's just can focus on what she needs to focus on and not, all this added stress for really no reason. So going about, and the engagement is actually the hardest part because during phases of women's lives, and we've talked about this before, it's not just like the housework, the work, it's the woman's ticker tape, right? It's the invisible work. So I'm thinking today as I'm talking to you, I dropped my kid off at college, I got a senior, I have all these things going on a ticker tape right now in my head that have to be done, much less of just work. So it's hard to get that opening of like meeting with you is like one more meeting she's got to do on a Wednesday. I've got to get all these things done. So we've got to make it sort of easier and fun. And you talked about too, whether you take the husband and wife just out to dinner with your wife, just to get to know it. It's not even a work meeting. It's just hey, let's just get to know each other. And it's something fun. It's not another item on a to-do list where the to-do list just doesn't seem to end. So, but again, it's always, but again, I like that idea of just, somehow getting to know them, even if it's not investment related focus. But I think it's important for advisors to understand that women want to be understood. They don't want to be fixed and they don't want to be told. And I think we get in this lot of things in meetings, and all of us are guilty of it, where we want to tell somebody what to do or try to fix the problem. And sometimes that's not what you need to be doing. You just need to be listening and have an understanding of who this woman is and what she wants at the time. And even if you don't have the answer, that's okay. But you've sat there and you understand.
I would also recommend that you establish these relationships as soon as possible. I've talked to you about sort of two very distinct situations that happened at the same time. A couple that I had worked with for 10 years, husband passed away pretty quickly from cancer, versus a lady that was referred to us by a friend of ours that husband passed away suddenly, and she's trying to figure out what to do. And those experiences so very different. We tried our best to help, the one where we kind of got introduced after the fact, but you're trying to figure out a lot of things at that point, where the one that we worked with for 10 years, dramatic, horrible, lots of pain, but we were able to have a plan in place already. And so she had comfort and trust and everything else already established. Trying to do all that when you're grieving and when your head spinning and everything else is very difficult. So I definitely would say do that as early as possible.
Yeah, I mean, making high stakes decisions while you're like in a very emotional situation, whether it's fighting with an ex in court, dealing with a spouse with Alzheimer's, dealing with a death, it is really hard to do. And a lot of times you don't make good decisions based on that because the decisions are based on fear.
Right.
And so it's if you already have the foundation in place, you've got a strong foundation, you can sort of withstand these sort of life storms. You already have, so you're not having to make decisions. Decisions are sort of already there, for you.
Yeah. And you're seeing people oftentimes at the crux of those type of issues, because as an estate attorney, you're doing a lot of the planning work, obviously, but you're also seeing people when they need you the most. And hopefully a lot of that plan is already in place and working, but if someone's listening to this right now, they're like, okay, thanks guys for scaring me to death and telling me all of the things that I need to be thinking about. What's sort of the plan of action? How do you help women with the next step of education, the next step of planning, the next step of being prepared? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I've sort of developed a framework. It's sort of like the blueprint for designing a woman's life. And it's 3 main steps. It's dream, design, build. And the dream part is sort of, figuring out what you want at the time. It's sort of asking discovery questions of yourself or having an advisor ask these questions. And you start to see patterns emerge of what's important to you right now. For example, for me, my pattern first is like getting my kids through college, paying for college education, figuring that whole thing out. That's a big priority for me. The next is risk. My husband and I are still relying on 2 incomes. So we lose one of them. That's a big risk to the family. And my third is still sort of purpose and legacy, like helping women involved. This kind of gives meaning to my own life. So that's sort of where I am right now. And I suspect within 5 or 10 years, while my kids are through college, my top 2 priorities may change. So if a woman's approaching a retirement, it may be something like, my dreams to, travel the world, my dreams to start this charity or, use my money, whatever it is, you sort of figure that step out first. What is the dream for you? It doesn't have to be like crazy dreams. It can just be, I want to, live debt free in a small house and have no stress, and that's okay.
Right.
But it's getting to what that is. Then the next is the design process. And that's sort of figuring out what you're going to use to fund that dream.
Yep.
So, and that is sort of taking inventory of where you are, what are your assets, what is your income, whether you have passive income or active working income, and what are your expenses. And it's kind of for women understanding that you could have a woman who makes $40,000 of income and spends $30,000, she's technically rich. Whether a woman who has, $500,000 of income and spends $600,000 is technically not rich. So it's figuring out like what that looks like. What is your burn rate? How much do you spend versus how much you earn? And sort of understanding how this money is going to be used. So that's the design part. And then the build process is building the plan to basically fund these dreams. And that's a lot of the estate planning documents that come in place to sort of protect all of that.
Okay. So when I think about dreaming, the first thing that comes in mind is this needs to be a combination of dreams, right? I imagine there needs to be your dreams. There needs to be maybe our dreams. I wonder how often women are kind of along for the ride with his dream. And especially when you think about retirement, especially if I think about that woman who isn't in a career herself. Is that a place that a lot of people find themselves, or how do women particularly dream about the future when maybe the way our industry has talked about it for so long is your retirement is your dream? Well, if I'm not retiring, what does that look like?
Right. What is that stage? Yeah. Well, and a lot of women have had full plates for so long, right? And it's hard to remove from a full plate. So you obviously have to like sort of like clean slate. It's much easier to add to a clean slate. So it's getting all this responsibility of what you had before off and kind of hitting a reset button. So what does, and it's hard when you've had a woman who's thought about everybody else for so long to actually think about herself. It feels selfish. But that's exactly what you got to do. Yeah. And it's like, what do I want for my, my relationship? What do I want for myself? What do I want for my kids, my grandkids? What is the life I want to live and we want to live? So it's getting all that into focus. And hopefully there is overlap with your spouse, but there may be some things that aren't overlap, and that's okay. But it's figuring out, again, what is important to you.
We talked about this a little bit, but you have a plan. So the dream, design, build plan. How do you get women to move? How do you get them to act? Because I would imagine, like most people, it's easy to think about, but how do you actually get people to get out of the inertia of all their to-do list and the ticker tape and actually start to execute on some of these things? Right.
Well, I mean, we've had some engagements where we've had like a little wine and cheese happy hour or a little coffee, and we're always struggling with finding the right time of day for women are most likely to participate. Because you think like the 5 to 7 is the bewitching hour where you're dealing with kids and that's a terrible time period, so whether it's lunch, so it's finding the right time period. I mean, to
figure
actually
that out, let me know.
Well, it's hard because it's like, they have these windows of time, like what is, is a lunch and learn the best thing? Is that a best thing to make it engaging? But it's hard. I always say to my clients, like, I will not harass you. I will gently nudge you.
There you go.
So it's just this sort of gentle nudging of, hey, what can I do to make it easier? If I send you a questionnaire and you look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to spend an hour filling this out. Well, let's fill it out together. Let's go have coffee and, spend 5 minutes on the questionnaire and 55 minutes just talking about life. I mean, stuff that just makes it, a little bit more fun and engaging.
Yeah. Talk about maybe some success stories that you've seen where people have, women have gone through a planning process. They've gone from a place maybe of fear and isolation to a place where they feel like they're thriving finally.
Yeah. So I have one woman who I'm thinking of is actually my own trainer. She was a product of a great divorce and kind of had to reset, realize that divorce was not going to bring her the income that she thought she's going to need to get through the next phase of her life. So she had been sort of a person who worked out most of her life. So she went and became certified to be a trainer and has groups of women that she trains, and the group's like 5 or 6 women at a time, and all these women are in different stages of life. There could be an 80-year-old with a 25-year-old, and they all come together and they're working out, just kind of building strength and but also camaraderie. And I go to these sessions. We all kind of help each other out with sort of what's going on. I helped one woman sort of negotiate with her employer, just some off comment I said to her, sort of along the lines of, they need you more than you need them. And just, just sort of like, but she was like that, but you get these, or, you're struggling with something with your kid, but somebody older has already been through that. And so she basically created this way to make money, but also gave her a sense of connection, purpose, and kind of sort of help reset her life that way. So I would deem her, and now she's working with me on not getting her estate planning documents together, but she sort of now feels like, okay, I'm good in my life and here's what I'm doing. Another example, but this is actually not my own personal, I just sort of like read about these. I always thought this was super interesting. Frances Hesselbein, she had started out most of her life as a stay-at-home mom and was like helped with her daughter's Girl Scout group as volunteer. Well, at 54, she got her first professional job, became CEO of the Girl Scouts in her 60s. Like had never had a professional job until she was 54 years old. And she thinks she died when she was like 100. I mean, like lived this crazy, like post, like professional career starting at age 54.
How many people would say that's not possible?
I think a lot. So I think people don't realize the skill set they have.
Yeah.
And she realized that the skill set she had used as a volunteer in the Girl Scouts actually translated to a very successful professional leadership career. Right. And I read something else of another woman who had retired at 79 and went back and got her college degree. And just these things that like, if you think of yourself maybe as a lifelong learner or that the path is still continuing, that you can do these things.
That seems like something that would be very hopeful.
Yes.
I think, I wonder how many women kind of just tell themselves that's not possible, that I'm already past that, or I don't have the skill set to do that. I know that there's a lot of self-talk that's a part of this process. So I hear stories like that and I say, that's got to bring hope to people that even in circumstances where maybe you're not where you want to be, maybe you find yourself suddenly saying, I have to go to work. How do I do that? There's people who've already done it ahead of you and proven that you're capable, you are amazing, that you are talented, and it's maybe been dormant for a while potentially, or that particular skill might be different than what you had anticipated using, but that you're so able to do so much more than you probably think.
Yeah, exactly. I had another friend of mine, another like divorced in her late 40s, and she had been volunteering at Northside Youth Organization, just at the, like running the girls' basketball program, and that her doing that translated to a fabulous job with the Hawks, doing all their community camps and getting involved community. So yes, you can do these things, and it's hard to take inventory of what are my strengths. But I think if we focus on our strengths and not on all these obstacles, like you can find things that, I mean, we have so much need in so many different areas in this country that you can help people just with what you have.
Yeah. I don't know the stats on who listens to my show and who doesn't. I would guess that it's predominantly men, probably the majority men. I don't know what the numbers are. So let's talk to the guys for a second. when you think about maybe, especially the spouses of these women that are nearing this retirement phase of life, what would you say to the men?
Right. First of all, it's not emasculating for your wife to be involved in financial decisions. It's not, a lot of men get
I would concur with that. Yes.
Well, they just get sort of socialized that their role is the primary breadwinner, the primary decision maker. And a lot of our society does that, when family's in the car, the man typically drives. If both parents are working, the man will typically pay the bill. There's a lot of socialization, and I'm not commenting on whether that's wrong, right. It's just sort of the way it is. And so it's, you want your wife to be involved. Yeah. You want her to be happy. I mean, the reason we engage in this process is out of love. I mean, you want to know at the end of the day, something should happen to you that she's going to be okay. Yeah. I mean, so that's why you do it. You do it out of love. And I see a lot of couples that come in their 60s, and the man is super excited the wife is there. Because now they're coming in together, they're going to lunch. They're now a partnership again. He doesn't feel totally responsible for it.
Yes.
Because now she's come in and is helping carry the load, and she's got a lot of insight, and he sort of is turning to her and, what do you think? And it's, it's sort of a beautiful thing in that regard. It's not but you do it again out of love.
It's freeing. Get past that hurdle and engage one another in this. And I've seen the weight come off of shoulders in those meetings when we finally have gauged both spouses. Everything's out on the table, good, bad, and ugly. And as you see almost healing taking place in the marriage, because so many marriages obviously end because of money squabbles.
Right.
And I would imagine most of it's because one has more information than the other, and there's an expectation gap, and that creates a lot of tension in the marriage. So I would just say, guys, engage them in the process, bring them alongside of you, and do this as a partnership, because it will be freeing for you and it'll be engaging for her, and you'll feel that. You'll definitely feel that.
Absolutely. I mean, because at the end of the day, the marriage is a partnership.
That's right.
The partners are equally responsible, totally liable, for everything. So I think it strengthens it by like you said, having full disclosure, full information, good, bad, whatever. But at least, and a lot of women, once we know what we're dealing with, we can deal with it. So it's not like we got to protect the delicate flower over here.
That's right.
I mean, a lot of women are super strong. Stronger, and they can withstand whatever it is. And so I think a lot of men want to, like you said, protect. I don't want her to know or worry about it, but that's not,
Well, I think there's shame involved in that.
Absolutely.
There's guilt involved in that. So I think there's a little bit of, it's not just wanting to protect her from it, it's probably wanting to present perfection.
Right.
And that's what guys, we got our own issues, right? We talked about women and how they struggle with things. Guys have our own issues too, and that's definitely one of them. And so that's an area that I would encourage people to just bridge that gap, because it will make your marriage stronger, which will help you retire well, for sure. To finish up, just one last piece of advice that you would say for any woman who is nearing this sort of new phase of life, going into the conversation of retirement. Maybe, as we said, retirement is so different now than it used to be. You're starting this conversation of a new phase of life. What's that one thing that you would tell them?
Yeah. So a few years ago, I was meeting with a client who came down and wanted me to review her estate planning documents. And she sat this big pile of documents down. I said, before I read any of this, I said, what do you want? And she was like, well, I don't know. No one's ever asked me that before. And it took some time to figure out what she wants. So for the women listening to this, or the men who are going to talk to the women, you need to figure out what you want. And it's hard to do. And it sounds easier said than done. So, and the last thing I would do, the other piece of advice, I'm going to borrow a quote from Atul Gawande, who wrote a book called Being Mortal. And it says, one has to decide whether one's fears or one's hopes are what should matter most. And hopefully it's your hope.
Well, that's a great thing to end it on. Stacy, I want to thank you for your time. This was a great conversation. We may have to do this again because there's so many routes we could take off of this, but I really do appreciate it. And we're going to be doing a redefining retirement conversation here on the podcast soon, because it's clearly something that people are talking about. And Serena has kind of popped the cork on this one, and it's definitely a topic that people want to discuss. So again, Stacy, thank you for your time. I'm sure that this is going to be valuable for anyone listening.
Well, thank you so much, Charlie, for having me. I really loved being here.
I want to give a big thank you to Stacy Hanley for joining me today. If you'd like to reach out to her and touch base with her, her information will be in the show notes for this episode. Really important to recognize that your individual situation is unique to you, and that anything we discuss today should not be considered legal or tax or investment advice. But you may have heard this podcast and have questions or want to talk to someone about your personal situation. We have ways you can connect with our team. If you'd like to connect with an advisor or have any questions for us to answer here on the podcast in a future listener question episode, you can shoot us an email at retiringwell@brightworth.com. Also, one of my favorite things we offer is the Retiring Well Connection. It's a monthly email newsletter. It covers all areas of life and retirement, both the money side and the personal side. And we search for great content all over the web, pull together 3 to 4 pieces each month, whether that's a podcast, article, book recommendation, etc. Pull together things that we think our readers and our listeners will find interesting and valuable. So there's a link to subscribe to that in the show notes. So make sure you get your Retire Well connection each month. And finally, you're going to hear us reference the elements of retirement frequently around here. We've developed a tool to help you think through what matters most to you in life, in retirement, and where you can prioritize your financial decision making to retire well. So to get your copy of what we call the 10 Elements of Retirement Self-Assessment, see the link in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us by rating and subscribing so you don't miss any future episodes. That's all for us today. I'm Charlie Jordan. Have a great day.